241,200 years. That is the combined reign of 8 kings who ruled before a catastrophic flood, according to a 4,000-year-old clay prism now housed in a climate-controlled chamber at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. One king alone governed for 36,000 years, another for 28,800. The document recording these figures was not the work of a single delusional scribe. 25 independent copies have been excavated from archaeological sites scattered across southern Iraq, composed over several centuries in different cities by scribes who never met, yet all preserve the same impossible chronology. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns to true north with a deviation of 3/60ths of a single degree. Modern surveyors using GPS and laser theodolites achieve accuracy of 1/20th of a degree. The pyramid was constructed, according to mainstream chronology, in 2560 BCE using copper tools and wooden measuring rods. The Nazca lines of Peru stretch across 500 square kilometers of desert, some figures spanning 300 meters, yet they can only be fully appreciated from the air, created by a civilization that possessed no aircraft. The Moai of Easter Island, some weighing 80 tons, stand in silent rows along the coastline of an island whose inhabitants supposedly possessed only stone tools and no draft animals. These facts are not disputed. The measurements have been verified. The dating has been confirmed. The question that has captivated millions, spawned a television series now entering its 19th season, and generated billions in books, documentaries, and merchandise asks a simple question. How? And for over half a century, one answer has refused to die, despite the ridicule of academics, despite the refutations of archaeologists, despite every debunking effort mounted against it. That answer proposes that humanity had help, that extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in the distant past, taught ancient peoples technologies beyond their native capability, and were remembered as gods descending from the heavens. The Weld-Blundell prism, that clay artifact in Oxford, measures approximately 20 centimetres in height and 9 centimetres in width. It was excavated in 1922 by British archaeologist Herbert Weld-Blundell during an expedition to the ancient Mesopotamian city of Larsa. Its cuneiform inscriptions preserve what scholars call the Sumerian King List. The text begins with a statement that would seem unremarkable in any ancient chronicle. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. But the reign lengths that follow have troubled researchers for over a century. This artifact represents our most complete version of a text that exists in approximately 25 fragmentary copies discovered across multiple archaeological sites in southern Mesopotamia. The German-American Assyriologist Hermann Vollrath Hilprecht published the first fragment in 1906, and French Assyriologist Jean-Vincent Schiele released the second in 1911. Since then, tablets and fragments have been recovered from Nippur, Ur, Kish-Awu, and several other ancient cities. The consistency of the core narrative across these independently excavated documents, composed over several centuries in different locations, raises questions that mainstream scholarship has addressed through various interpretive frameworks, yet questions that continue to fuel alternative theories about human origins. The Sumerian cuneiform writing system itself represents one of humanity's most remarkable intellectual achievements. Developed around 3400 BCE for administrative record-keeping, the script evolved from pictographic symbols representing concrete objects to an abstract system capable of recording complex narratives, royal decrees, mathematical calculations, and astronomical observations. The transformation from simple accounts of grain and livestock to sophisticated literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, the earliest known extended narrative in human history, occurred over approximately a millennium through incremental innovation by generations of scribes trained in temple schools. This intellectual development requires no external intervention to explain. It represents human cognitive capability applied to practical problems and gradually extended to broader applications. The tablets themselves provide physical evidence of their human authorship. Clay sourced from local riverbeds, shaped by human hands, impressed with wedge-shaped marks made by reed styluses, then dried or fired to preserve the inscriptions. Archaeological excavations have uncovered the remains of scribal schools, complete with practice tablets showing student exercises, corrected texts, and the progression from simple sign lists to complex compositions. The infrastructure of literacy, the training systems that produce scribes capable of recording the Sumerian King List and countless other texts, is thoroughly documented in the archaeological record. Professor Thorkild Jacobson of Harvard University produced the definitive critical edition of the Sumerian King List in 1939, incorporating all then-known manuscript variants and analysing the text's structure, language, and relationship to other Mesopotamian literary traditions. His work established that the King List served political rather than historical purposes, presenting kingship as a divine institution that moved among cities according to divine will, with each ruling city holding a mandate from heaven until the gods chose to transfer power elsewhere. The fantastically long reign lengths of the antediluvian section serve to emphasise the sacred origins of royal authority, placing the institution of kingship in a mythological past beyond ordinary human experience. Conventional archaeological interpretation regards the Sumerian King List as a political propaganda document designed to legitimize the authority of ruling dynasties by presenting a continuous lineage of kingship stretching back to the beginning of civilization itself. Professor Piotr Steinkeller of Harvard University has argued that the list was first compiled during the Akkad dynasty to position Akkadian rulers as direct heirs to the hegemony of Kish. The fantastically long reign lengths are interpreted as mythological constructs, perhaps representing dynastic periods rather than individual lifespans, or as symbolic expressions of divine mandate that gradually diminished as kingship passed from gods to godlike beings to ordinary mortals. The Ashmolean Museum's own description of the artifact acknowledges this complexity directly, stating that the Sumerian King List is not history as we would understand it, but a combination of myth, legend, and historical information. Yet alternative interpretations have persisted since the mid-20th century, fueled by a curious parallel between the Sumerian record and the genealogies preserved in the Hebrew scriptures. The antediluvian patriarchs listed in Genesis chapter 5, from Adam to Noah, exhibit similarly extraordinary lifespans, with Methuselah famously reaching 969 years. Some researchers have noted mathematical relationships between the Sumerian and biblical chronologies, suggesting either cultural borrowing or a shared source of ancestral memory. The Sumerians operated with a sexagesimal base 60 mathematical system rather than the base 10 system employed today, leading some scholars to propose that the extraordinary reign lengths may represent recording errors or alternative computational frameworks that modern interpreters have failed to properly decode. The question that emerges from these ancient texts, a question that has captivated millions of readers and viewers over the past half-century, asks whether these accounts preserve distorted memories of actual events, whether advanced beings of some kind once walked among early human civilizations, and whether the traces of their presence remain encoded in mythology, architecture, and artifacts scattered across the globe. This hypothesis, popularized under various names, including ancient astronauts, paleocontact, and ancient aliens, proposes that extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in the distant past influenced the development of human culture and technology, and were subsequently remembered in religious traditions as gods descending from the sky. The proposition emerged into mainstream Western consciousness through a Swiss author named Erich von Däniken, whose 1968 book Chariots of the Gods became an international sensation, eventually selling over 70 million copies and spawning a multimedia phenomenon that continues to this day. Von Däniken's central argument held that many ancient monuments and artifacts display technological sophistication beyond the presumed capabilities of their builders, and that the simplest explanation for this anomaly involves intervention by advanced extraterrestrial beings. The book examined the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Nazca Lines of Peru, the statues of Easter Island, and numerous other archaeological sites, suggesting that conventional explanations underestimated the challenges these constructions would have presented to ancient peoples equipped only with copper tools, wooden implements, and human muscle power. The intellectual genealogy of ancient astronaut theories extends beyond von Däniken to earlier 20th century writers. French authors Louis Pauwels and Jacques Bergier published The Morning of the Magicians in 1960, blending pseudo-history, occultism, and speculation about advanced ancient civilizations with theories about UFOs and extraterrestrial contact. French science fiction author Robert Charroux explored similar themes in his 1963 book 100,000 Years of Man's Unknown History. A 2004 article in Skeptic magazine argued that many concepts in von Däniken's work derived from these earlier sources, and traced certain themes back further still to the science fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, particularly his 1926 story The Call of Cthulhu and his 1931 novella At the Mountains of Madness, which featured ancient extraterrestrial beings influencing early human development. Von Däniken's personal background has been cited by critics as relevant to evaluating his work. Before becoming a best-selling author, he worked as a hotel manager in Switzerland. He had no formal training in archaeology, anthropology, or any related field. In 1968, a Swiss court convicted him of fraud and embezzlement related to financial misrepresentations at his hotel, sentencing him to 3.5 years in prison. He reportedly wrote his second book, Gods from Outer Space, while serving this sentence. Critics have suggested that his demonstrated willingness to deceive for financial gain should inform assessment of claims from which he has profited enormously. The response from academic archaeology was swift and overwhelmingly negative. Ronald Story published The Space Gods Revealed, a close look at the theories of Erich von Däniken in 1976, offering what reviewers described as a coherent and much-needed refutation of von Däniken's theories. Archaeologist Clifford Wilson contributed 2 similar volumes, Crash Go the Chariots in 1972 and The Chariots Still Crash in 1975. The scholarly consensus, as articulated in the journal Skeptical Inquirer and numerous academic publications, held that the ancient astronaut hypothesis constituted pseudo-archaeology, characterized by selective evidence presentation, misrepresentation of archaeological findings, and a fundamental underestimation of human ingenuity and capability. The University of Pennsylvania Museum's magazine Expedition published a detailed analysis of von Däniken's methodology, examining specific claims and identifying patterns of distortion. The article noted that von Däniken frequently presented questions as assertions, cited sources selectively, and ignored readily available evidence that contradicted his interpretations. Thor Heyerdahl's book Aku Aku, which documented successful experiments in carving, moving, and erecting Easter Island statues using indigenous techniques, appeared in von Däniken's bibliography yet was ignored in his discussion of how the Moai might have been transported. The analysis concluded that von Däniken seemed less than honest in setting the evidence before his readers. Despite scholarly rejection, von Däniken's ideas achieved remarkable popular success. His books were translated into dozens of languages and sold tens of millions of copies worldwide. A 1970 documentary film based on Chariots of the Gods reached international audiences. Von Däniken became a fixture on television talk shows and lecture circuits, particularly in Europe, where his theories retained substantial following even as English-language sales temporarily declined during the 1970s amid intensifying criticism. A 25-part German television series in 1993 revived international interest, leading to renewed English translations and eventually to the long-running Ancient Aliens television program that has introduced his ideas to new generations of viewers. The criticism extended beyond mere factual disputes to address methodological and ethical concerns. Professor Kenneth Feder of Central Connecticut State University, in his textbook Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries, identified 3 primary categories of claims advanced by ancient astronaut proponents. The first, which he termed the inkblot hypothesis, involved interpreting ancient artwork as depictions of advanced technology or extraterrestrial beings. The second, the amorous astronaut hypothesis, proposed that aliens had genetically modified early humans or interbred with them, accelerating evolutionary development. The third, which Feder called our ancestors the dummies hypothesis, assumed that ancient peoples lacked the intelligence or capability to achieve their documented accomplishments without outside assistance. This last criticism carries particular weight because it touches on questions of cultural respect and implicit bias. Some scholars have argued that ancient astronaut theories carry racist undertones by suggesting that non-European peoples, particularly those who constructed the monuments most frequently cited as evidence for alien intervention, could not have achieved their accomplishments independently. The writer Ruth H. Burns of Dakota and Lakota Sioux descent has offered a counter-perspective, noting that many indigenous cultures preserve traditions of star ancestors and extraterrestrial origins that predate European contact, and that dismissing these traditions as primitive mythology itself constitutes a form of cultural erasure. The debate thus intersects with broader questions about how Western scholarship interprets and evaluates non-Western historical narratives. Yet the popularity of ancient astronaut theories, far from diminishing under scholarly criticism, has continued to expand through television programs, documentary films, and social media platforms. The History Channel series Ancient Aliens, which premiered in 2009, has now completed over 19 seasons, introducing millions of viewers to the hypothesis and its purported evidence. The program employs what media analysts have described as a fire-hosing strategy, presenting a rapid succession of claims, images, and rhetorical questions that intermingle verified archaeological facts with speculative interpretations. This approach, while effective as entertainment, has generated frustration among professional archaeologists who find their work misrepresented or their explanations ignored. To assess the ancient astronaut hypothesis fairly, one must examine both the evidence cited by its proponents and the alternative explanations offered by mainstream scholarship. This requires engaging with specific archaeological sites, artifacts, and texts, evaluating what is actually known about them, and considering what conclusions the evidence can reasonably support. Such an examination reveals a more complex picture than either fervent believers or dismissive skeptics typically acknowledge, a landscape of genuine mysteries alongside well-documented human achievements, of unanswered questions coexisting with substantial archaeological understanding. Consider the case of Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site in southeastern Turkey that has genuinely transformed scholarly understanding of the Neolithic period. The site was first noted in a 1963 survey conducted by researchers from the University of Istanbul and the University of Chicago, who observed what appeared to be a medieval cemetery atop an artificial mound. The limestone slabs visible at the surface were assumed to be grave markers, and the site received little further attention for 3 decades. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, working with the German Archaeological Institute, recognized the exposed stones as Neolithic T-shaped pillars similar to those discovered at the nearby site of Nevlu Chori, which had been excavated before being submerged by the waters of the Ataturk Dam. Schmidt began systematic excavations at Göbekli Tepe the following year, initiating a project that would continue until his death in 2014, and thereafter under the direction of Turkish prehistorian Necmi Karel and the German Archaeological Institute. The discoveries proved extraordinary. Beneath the hilltop lay multiple circular stone enclosures, the largest approximately 20 meters in diameter, containing massive T-shaped limestone pillars or cymbals standing up to 6 meters tall and weighing as much as 40 to 60 metric tons. The pillars were carved with elaborate reliefs as depicting wild animals, including foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, lions, and various birds. Some pillars featured anthropomorphic details suggesting stylized human figures with arms and hands carved in low relief along their sides. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from the site produced dates clustering around 9,600 to 9,200 BCE, making Göbekli Tepe among the oldest known examples of monumental architecture anywhere in the world. The site predates the conventional timeline for the Neolithic Revolution, the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture and settled village life, by over a millennium. According to established archaeological models, such monumental construction should have required the organizational capacity of agricultural societies capable of producing food surpluses to support specialized labor. Göbekli Tepe appeared to challenge this sequence, suggesting that complex ritual activity and monumental construction might have preceded, rather than followed, the development of agriculture. Schmidt's interpretation of the site emphasized its ritual function. The enclosures contain no evidence of residential structures, cooking hearths, or domestic refuse. The animal bones recovered from excavations showed cut marks and splintering consistent with butchering and cooking, but archaeozoologist Joris Peters of Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich determined that these represented wild game rather than domesticated livestock, suggesting feasting rather than permanent settlement. Schmidt proposed that Göbekli Tepe served as a sanctuary for dispersed hunter-gatherer populations who gathered periodically for ceremonies, constructing and maintaining the stone enclosures over centuries before deliberately burying them and moving on. The demands of organizing such gatherings and feeding the workforce may have provided the impetus for domesticating plants and animals, reversing the conventional model of social evolution. First the temple, then the city, as Schmidt summarized his theory. More recent research has complicated this interpretation. Excavations conducted after Schmidt's death have revealed evidence suggesting that Göbekli Tepe may have been more than a purely ritual site. Archaeologist Lara Dietrich of the German Archaeological Institute analysed thousands of grinding stones and carved vessels excavated from the site, demonstrating through use-wear studies and chemical residue analysis that these implements had been used to process grains and legumes, including the preparation of what appears to have been a grain-based porridge or beverage. Excavations also uncovered a carved cistern, approximately 8 meters across and over 2 meters deep, along with water channels suggesting rainwater harvesting. These findings indicate permanent or semi-permanent habitation rather than purely occasional ceremonial use. The iconography of Göbekli Tepe's carved pillars has been subject to extensive analysis. The animal reliefs include a wide range of species, predominantly predators and dangerous animals, rather than the domesticated livestock or hunted game that would dominate later Neolithic art. Lions, leopards, foxes, boars, scorpions and snakes appear frequently, often depicted in aggressive postures or multiple instances crowding the pillar surfaces. This emphasis on dangerous creatures has been interpreted as reflecting shamanistic worldviews, liminal zones between human and animal realms, or apotropaic protection through the depiction of threatening beings. One pillar in Enclosure D, known informally as the Vulture Stone, depicts a headless human figure alongside birds that appear to be vultures, and a circular object that some have interpreted as the sun. This scene has attracted particular attention from researchers investigating possible astronomical alignments, and from alternative theorists proposing various exotic interpretations. Mainstream archaeological analysis relates the imagery to excarnation practices documented in other Neolithic contexts, in which the dead were exposed to scavenging birds as part of funerary rituals. The vulture's role as a psychopomp conveying souls to the afterlife appears in numerous ancient cultures and provides adequate context for the relief without requiring astronomical or extraterrestrial interpretation. The anthropomorphic elements of the T-shaped pillars have generated extensive discussion. The central pillars of several enclosures feature arms carved in low relief along their sides, with hands meeting at what would be the figure's midsection. Some pillars show additional details including belts, loincloths, and possible necklaces or collar decorations. These features suggest that the pillars represent stylized human figures, perhaps ancestors, mythological beings, or supernatural entities important to the site's ritual function. The absence of facial features, with the flat top of the T serving as the head, may reflect taboos against depicting the human face, or may simply represent the conventions of the artistic tradition. Comparative analysis places Göbekli Tepe within a broader regional phenomenon. Similar T-shaped pillars have been discovered at other sites in southeastern Turkey, including Karahan Tepe, where excavations beginning in 2019 have uncovered structures comparable in scale and sophistication to those at Göbekli Tepe. The site known as the Taş Tepeler, or Stone Hills, includes multiple locations with Neolithic remains featuring the distinctive pillar architecture, suggesting a shared cultural tradition extending across a substantial geographical area. These discoveries indicate that the achievements at Göbekli Tepe were not isolated anomalies but part of a broader pattern of Neolithic development in Upper Mesopotamia. The construction techniques employed at Göbekli Tepe have been documented through careful excavation and analysis. Quarry sites where the pillars were cut from bedrock have been identified, with unfinished pillars still partially attached to the parent rock providing evidence of the extraction process. Stone hammers and other tools consistent with the shaping work have been recovered. The pillars were apparently carved in place, then separated from the bedrock and transported to their final locations in the enclosures. The labour requirements, while substantial, fall within the capacity of coordinated hunter-gatherer populations during seasons when wild food resources were abundant. The site was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2018, recognizing its outstanding universal value as one of the first manifestations of human-made monumental architecture. As of recent assessments, only approximately 10% of the site has been excavated, suggesting that decades of additional research lie ahead. The discoveries at Göbekli Tepe have generated legitimate scientific excitement precisely because they challenge existing models and require revision of established chronologies. Yet this scientific significance differs substantially from the claims advanced by ancient astronaut proponents, who cite the site as evidence that prehistoric peoples could not have constructed such monuments without extraterrestrial assistance. The archaeological evidence actually demonstrates the opposite conclusion. The tools used to carve the pillars have been recovered in abundance, including stone hammers, blades and scrapers consistent with Neolithic lithic technology. Archaeologist Ted Banning of the University of Toronto has emphasised that the site's construction, while impressive, falls within the range of capabilities demonstrated by other Neolithic communities in the region. The labour requirements, estimated by various researchers at around 500 workers over several decades, could have been met by coordinated efforts among regional hunter-gatherer populations, particularly if construction occurred seasonally during periods when wild food resources were abundant. The site reveals sophisticated social organisation and symbolic thought among Neolithic peoples, but it does not require positing technologies or knowledge beyond what humans demonstrably possessed. The Great Pyramid of Giza presents a similar pattern of genuine archaeological complexity that has been appropriated for speculative purposes far removed from the actual evidence. Constructed during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE, according to mainstream Egyptological chronology, the pyramid originally stood approximately 146 metres tall and contained an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks with an average weight of 2.5 tonnes, though some blocks in the internal chambers weigh 60 to 80 tonnes. The precision of its construction remains remarkable by any standard. Survey work conducted by J.H. Cole for the Egyptian government in 1925 and subsequently confirmed by electronic distance measurement in 1984 and laser scanning in 2015 established that the four sides of the base measure within 20 centimetres of each other across a base spanning over 230 metres per side, representing a construction tolerance of approximately 0.087%. The alignment of the pyramid to true north deviates by only 3/60 of a single degree, precision that exceeds what modern surveyors typically achieve using GPS and laser theodolites. The internal chambers demonstrate equally impressive stonework, with the granite slabs of the king's chamber cut and fitted with millimetre precision. These achievements have led ancient astronaut proponents to argue that the ancient Egyptians could not have possessed the technology to achieve such results, and that the pyramid must therefore represent either extraterrestrial construction or the application of lost advanced technologies beyond conventional archaeological understanding. Yet the archaeological record provides substantial evidence for how the pyramid was actually built. The diary of an official named Merer, discovered in 2013 by French archaeologist Pierre Tallet in a cave at the ancient port of Wadi al-Jarf, describes the transportation of limestone blocks from quarries at Tura to Giza by boat along a waterway that recent geological surveys have mapped as an extinct branch of the Nile. The logs detail the organisation of work crews, the duration of transport voyages, and the bureaucratic management of a large-scale construction project. A 2024 study using radar satellite imagery identified segments of this waterway, dubbed the Aramat branch, running to the foothills where the pyramids stand, providing direct evidence for the logistical infrastructure that supported construction. The discovery of Merer's papyrus represents one of the most significant archaeological finds of recent decades for understanding pyramid construction. The documents, written in hieratic script, describe the day-to-day activities of a crew of about 200 men who transported limestone blocks from Tura across the Nile and up a system of canals to the Giza construction site. The logs record the number of journeys made, the time required for each trip, and the inspection protocols that ensured blocks met quality standards. The bureaucratic precision of these records demonstrates the sophisticated administrative systems that supported Egyptian monumental construction. The workers themselves left abundant evidence of their presence. Excavations of the workers' village at Giza, conducted by Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass beginning in the 1990s, revealed a planned settlement with bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread daily, a brewery, a fish processing facility, and dormitories that house the workforce. Analysis of animal bones from the site indicates that workers consumed substantial quantities of beef, a high-status food that suggests they were well provided, rather than merely subsisting. Skeletal remains recovered from associated cemeteries show evidence of healed injuries consistent with construction accidents, demonstrating that workers who were injured received medical care and continued in the community rather than being discarded or replaced. Graffiti left by work crews provides additional evidence of human authorship. The relieving chambers above the King's Chamber contain red ochre inscriptions identifying work gangs with names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. These graffiti were hidden from view once the chambers were sealed and served no practical purpose except to record the identity of the crews who placed the stones. The inscriptions demonstrate pride in work, team identity, and the organisational structure that divided the workforce into named units, with their own traditions and rivalries. The tools employed by Egyptian quarrymen and masons have been recovered from archaeological contexts throughout the Giza Plateau. Copper chisels, saws and drills, stone hammers, wooden wedges and measuring instruments are well documented. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that these tools, though humble by modern standards, were effective for the tasks required. Dennis Stocks, a British experimental archaeologist, spent decades replicating ancient Egyptian stoneworking techniques, demonstrating that copper tools could cut and shape granite when used with sand abrasives, and that the drilling patterns visible on ancient artifacts matched those produced by tube drills rotating with sand slurry. The precision of the pyramid's alignment can be explained through astronomical observation methods available to the Egyptians, who possess sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics, as evidenced by their calendar systems and the astronomical alignments incorporated into numerous temples and monuments. The levelling of the foundation may have been achieved by cutting trenches in the bedrock, flooding them with water, and reducing the intervening rock to uniform height, a technique suggested by physical evidence documented by Egyptologist Mark Lehner. The organisational capacity required for pyramid construction is likewise documented in the archaeological record. Excavations of workers' villages near the Giza pyramids have revealed evidence of a well-organised, well-fed labour force that included both permanent specialists and seasonal workers, many of whom were farmers employed during the annual Nile flood, when agricultural work was impossible. Hieroglyphic inscriptions indicate that the workforce was organised into crews, gangs and divisions with specific responsibilities. Estimates based on available evidence suggest that approximately 20 to 30,000 workers participated in the Great Pyramid's construction, a substantial mobilization, but one well within the capacity of the Egyptian state at the height of its Old Kingdom power. This does not mean that all questions about pyramid construction have been answered. The precise method by which the heaviest blocks were raised to upper levels remains debated, with various ramp hypotheses, lever systems, and internal construction techniques proposed by different researchers. The extraordinary precision of certain features continues to challenge explanation, but the existence of unresolved questions differs fundamentally from the existence of unanswerable mysteries. The evidence indicates that the pyramids were built by Egyptian workers using Egyptian technology for Egyptian religious purposes, not by extraterrestrial visitors using advanced alien devices. The Nazca lines of Peru present another case study in the gap between archaeological evidence and ancient astronaut interpretation. Located in the arid desert of southern Peru, the lines comprise over 800 straight lines, some extending more than 30 kilometers, along with approximately 70 geoglyphs depicting animals including a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, and various birds, as well as geometric shapes and stylized human figures. The lines were created by removing the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated pebbles that cover the desert surface to reveal the lighter ground beneath, a technique that the extremely dry climate has preserved for between 2,000 and 1,500 years, dating to the Nazca culture that flourished in the region from approximately 200 BCE to 600 CE. German-American mathematician and archaeologist Maria Reiche dedicated over 50 years to studying and preserving the Nazca lines, beginning with her collaboration with American historian Paul Kosok in 1940. Kosok had originally come to Peru to study ancient irrigation systems and became interested in the lines after observing that one appeared to align with the setting sun on the winter solstice. Reiche took over the research when Kosok departed in 1948 and devoted the remainder of her life to documenting, analysing and protecting the geoglyphs. She published her theories in The Mystery on the Desert in 1949, proposing that the lines served as a vast astronomical calendar, with various figures representing constellations and straight lines marking solstices and equinoxes. Reiche's commitment to the Nazca lines went far beyond academic study. She lived in a small house adjacent to the lines, eventually taking up permanent residence in room 130 of a hotel overlooking the desert plateau, where she continued lecturing on her findings until her death in 1998. Using her own funds and proceeds from her book sales, she hired guards to protect the geoglyphs from casual visitors who might damage them by walking across the desert surface. She lobbied the Peruvian government to restrict access to the area and successfully opposed plans to run irrigation canals through the geoglyph field. Her efforts contributed directly to the site's recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1994. Reiche's astronomical interpretation attracted significant attention but has been largely rejected by subsequent research. Archaeoastronomer Gerald Hawkins, famous for his work on Stonehenge, conducted a statistical analysis of Nazca line orientations in the 1960s and found no significant correlation with astronomical events beyond what chance would predict. Anthony Avni of Colgate University conducted more extensive studies and reached similar conclusions. The lines do not preferentially point to solstice or equinox positions, and the claimed constellation correspondences require considerable imaginative interpretation rather than straightforward mapping. Current scholarly interpretation emphasizes the religious and ceremonial functions of the lines within Nazca culture. The desert plateau receives minimal rainfall, and water scarcity was the dominant concern shaping Nazca religious practice. Many geoglyphs appear oriented toward mountain peaks where rainfall originates, and their figures may have served as offerings or appeals to mountain deities associated with water provision. The straight lines may have functioned as sacred pathways used in ceremonial processions, with participants walking the lines as acts of devotion or supplication. Underground aqueducts called puquios, some still functioning today, demonstrate the Nazca civilization's sophisticated hydraulic engineering, connecting surface rituals with the practical technologies that made settled life possible in the arid landscape. Subsequent research has largely rejected Riker's astronomical interpretation while affirming her contribution to documenting and preserving the site. Archaeoastronomers Gerald Hawkins and Anthony Avni demonstrated that the line's orientations do not exhibit statistically significant correlations with recurring celestial phenomena beyond what would be expected by chance. Current scholarly interpretation emphasizes the line's ritual and religious significance, likely connected to water and fertility in an extremely arid environment. The figures may have been created as part of ceremonial processions, or as offerings to deities associated with mountains and water sources. These straight lines may have served as sacred pathways connecting ritual sites. Recent discoveries have expanded understanding of the geoglyphs' extent and variety. In 2019 and 2020, Japanese researchers using aerial surveys and drone photography identified over 140 previously unknown geoglyphs, including figures depicting human forms, camelids, and other animals. Some of these newly discovered figures are substantially smaller than the famous large geoglyphs and may have served different ceremonial purposes. The discoveries suggest that geoglyph creation was a widespread cultural practice among the Nazca, rather than an exceptional undertaking limited to the most famous examples. The creation process has been well documented through archaeological investigation. The Nazca removed the reddish-brown pebbles and oxidized surface layer to expose the lighter subsurface, creating lines that appear light against the darker surrounding terrain. The extreme aridity of the region, which receives less than 1 inch of rainfall annually, has preserved the geoglyphs for approximately 2 millennia. The lines themselves are not deep excavations but relatively shallow clearings, typically only 10 to 30 centimeters below the original surface. The geometric precision achieved in straight lines extending for kilometers required surveying techniques, but nothing beyond what could be accomplished with wooden stakes, rope, and careful planning. Experimental archaeology has successfully replicated Nazca-style geoglyphs using only materials and techniques available to the ancient culture. In 1982, a team led by Joe Nickel created a 120-meter condor figure in a single morning using stakes and string to lay out the design, then clearing the surface material to create the image. The experiment demonstrated that the geoglyphs required no mysterious technology, only careful planning, coordination, and the investment of labor that monumental art typically demands. The Nazca invested substantial effort in their geoglyphs because the desert landscape and the deities it represented mattered profoundly to their culture, not because they were constructing landing facilities for extraterrestrial visitors. The von Däniken interpretation proposed that the lines served as landing strips for extraterrestrial spacecraft, an idea that fails to withstand scrutiny for multiple reasons. First, the lines vary dramatically in width, direction, and surface consistency, making them impractical as runways. Second, any civilization capable of interstellar travel would presumably possess vertical landing capability, eliminating any need for runways. Third, the geoglyphs depict recognizable local flora and fauna, including species native to the South American coast and highlands, suggesting local cultural authorship rather than alien design. Fourth, experimental archaeology has demonstrated that the lines could be created using simple technology, with teams using wooden stakes and string to lay out designs that were then executed by removing surface stones to predetermined patterns. The construction of the lines required no technology beyond what the Nazca culture demonstrably possessed. The figures, while impressive from the air, can be designed and executed from ground level using basic surveying techniques. The monkey, for example, measures approximately 90 meters across, but its outline could be established by staking out a grid pattern, enlarging a smaller design to the larger scale, and removing surface material along the resulting coordinates. The straight lines required only a sighting point, a destination marker, and the organizational capacity to maintain direction over long distances, a capability demonstrated by numerous ancient cultures for purposes ranging from road construction to astronomical observation. Easter Island presents perhaps the most frequently cited example of an ancient mystery that supposedly defies conventional explanation, yet for which the archaeological solution has become increasingly clear. The island, known to its indigenous inhabitants as Rapa Nui, lies over 3,500 kilometers from the South American coast in the southeastern Pacific Ocean. It is famous for its moai, the massive stone statues with elongated heads and prominent features that dot the island's coastline, many originally standing on ceremonial platforms called ahu. The moai were carved from volcanic tuff at the Rano Raraku quarry and somehow transported, despite their substantial weight, to locations around the island's perimeter. How this transportation was accomplished became a central mystery that ancient astronaut proponents cited as evidence for advanced technology. The indigenous Rapa Nui had their own answer, one they had shared with European visitors since the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen arrived in 1722. The statues walked, the islanders explained. This assertion was long dismissed as legend, a supernatural explanation reflecting pre-modern beliefs about the magical powers of the moai. Yet research by anthropologist Carl Lipo of Binghamton University and archaeologist Terry Hunt of the University of Arizona has demonstrated that the islanders' explanation was essentially accurate, not as a description of magical ambulation, but as a technical term for the actual transport method. The dismissal of indigenous knowledge represents a recurring pattern in the history of archaeology. European and American researchers frequently assumed that non-Western peoples could not accurately remember or transmit information about their own history, dismissing oral traditions as mere mythology while privileging Western scientific interpretation. The Rapa Nui consistently maintained that their ancestors had walked the moai, but this testimony was ignored until experimental archaeology demonstrated its validity. Similar patterns appear throughout the history of the discipline, with indigenous knowledge eventually vindicated after decades of scholarly skepticism. Lipo and Hunt published their findings in a 2025 paper in the Journal of Archaeological Science, synthesizing over a decade of analysis involving nearly 1,000 moai. Their research focused particularly on 62 moai found along ancient transport roads leading from the Rano Raraku quarry. These road moai exhibited distinctive features that differed from moai placed on ceremonial platforms, specifically wider D-shaped bases, and a pronounced forward lean of 5 to 15 degrees from vertical. These characteristics, the researchers demonstrated, were not accidental damage but deliberate design features that enabled a specific transport method. The distinction between road moai and platform moai proved crucial to understanding the transport system. Moai destined for ceremonial platforms were carved with features appropriate to their final display, including flat bases suitable for standing on stone platforms and upright postures that would appear dignified when viewed from below. Road moai, by contrast, were shaped specifically for transport, with modifications that would be altered or refined once they reached their destinations. The forward lean that facilitated walking would be corrected during final finishing. Eye sockets, absent from all road moai but present on platform moai, were apparently carved only after the statue reached its final location. The walking technique involved teams of workers using ropes to rock the statues from side to side, causing them to advance in a controlled zigzag motion along prepared roads. The forward lean shifted the center of gravity to facilitate tipping, while the D-shaped base created a pivot point for each step. The roads themselves, which extended over 25 kilometers from the quarry, averaged approximately 4.5 meters in width, with concave cross-sections that would guide a walking statue and prevent it from falling sideways. The researchers successfully demonstrated the method by constructing a 4.35 metric ton replica moai with the distinctive road moai morphology. A team of 18 people using 3 ropes transported this replica 100 meters in 40 minutes. The physics of the walking method scale favorably with statue size. Larger moai, despite their greater mass, also have longer strides, meaning they cover more ground with each rocking motion. The researchers calculated that the largest moai successfully transported, weighing over 80 metric tons, could actually be moved more efficiently than smaller examples. The scaling properties help explain why the Rapa Nui attempted increasingly ambitious statues over time, as larger moai did not present proportionally greater transport challenges. The largest moai that remained unfinished in the quarry exceeded the transport capacity not because they were too heavy to move, but because they exceeded the structural limits of the available rope materials. Analysis of Triumpheta semitriloba fibres, the plant material from which Rapa Nui ropes were manufactured, established precise load limits for the cordage available to the ancient islanders. These calculations demonstrated that the largest unfinished moai would have required rope diameters exceeding what human hands could effectively grip and manipulate. This finding provides a satisfying explanation for why these particular statues were never completed, not because the workers abandoned them mysteriously, but because they determined that the statues exceeded practical transport limits. The connection between materials science and archaeological interpretation reveals the sophisticated engineering calculations that ancient Rapa Nui must have performed, even if not in mathematical terms familiar to modern engineers. The distribution of abandoned moai along the transport road supports the walking hypothesis. Over 50% of abandoned road moai were found within 2 kilometers of the quarry, with the number decreasing exponentially with distance. This pattern is consistent with transport failure, suggesting that statues were most likely to fall during the initial stages of transport, and that those that survived the first few kilometers were likely to reach their destinations. The breakage patterns on fallen road moai are likewise consistent with toppling forward or sideways during transport, rather than falling during attempts to move them horizontally. Previous theories had proposed that the moai were transported horizontally, either by rolling on logs or by dragging on wooden sledges. These hypotheses generated concern about environmental impact, since manufacturing sufficient rollers or sledges would have required cutting virtually all trees on an island with limited forest resources. The walking hypothesis resolves this concern as the method requires only ropes and human labour without significant timber consumption. The deforestation of Easter Island, well documented in the pollen record, likely resulted from land clearance for agriculture and firewood needs rather than from moai transport. The ecological collapse narrative that positioned the Rapa Nui as environmental villains who destroyed their own island through reckless statue building requires substantial revision in light of this evidence. The contemporary Rapa Nui community has responded positively to research that validates their oral traditions. For generations, indigenous knowledge was dismissed as primitive superstition, while Western scholars proposed increasingly elaborate theories that attributed the moai to aliens, lost continents, or mysterious technologies. The walking hypothesis honours the Rapa Nui people by confirming that their ancestors were ingenious engineers who developed an efficient solution to a challenging problem using available materials and sophisticated understanding of physics. The statues truly walked, moved by human ingenuity rather than extraterrestrial intervention or lost advanced technology. This research honours the indigenous Rapa Nui people by confirming their oral traditions and demonstrating that they achieved a remarkable engineering feat using available materials and sophisticated understanding of physics. The moai truly walked, moved by human ingenuity rather than extraterrestrial intervention or lost advanced technology. The solution required no recourse to explanations beyond documented human capability. The Dogon people of Mali provide a different category of ancient astronaut evidence, one based not on monumental architecture, but on alleged astronomical knowledge. Robert Temple's 1976 book The Sirius Mystery proposed that the Dogon possessed accurate information about the Sirius star system, including knowledge of Sirius B, a white dwarf companion star invisible to the naked eye. According to French anthropologists Marcel Griaule and Germaine Dieterlen, who studied the Dogon in the 1930s and 1940s, the tribe's traditions described Sirius as having a dark, invisible companion with a 50-year orbital period, extreme density, and a composition involving a special heavy element. These details correspond remarkably with modern astronomical understanding of Sirius B, which was not visually confirmed until the 1860s and whose properties were not fully characterized until the development of 20th century physics. Temple proposed that this knowledge derived from contact with amphibious beings called Nommo, who visited Earth from the Sirius system in the distant past. teaching astronomical knowledge to human civilizations, including the Dogon's ancestors. The hypothesis generated substantial interest and remains popular in ancient astronaut circles. However, the evidence for the Dogon's supposedly ancient astronomical knowledge has been systematically challenged by subsequent research. Astronomer Carl Sagan addressed the Dogon claims in his 1979 book Broca's Brain, agreeing with Temple that the Dogon could not have acquired accurate knowledge of Sirius B without contact with a technologically advanced civilization. However, Sagan proposed that this civilization was terrestrial rather than extraterrestrial. The Dogon region of West Africa had received numerous visitors from technological societies by the time Griol conducted his research, including French colonial administrators, missionaries, and possibly amateur astronomers interested in observing a solar eclipse visible from the region in 1893. Knowledge of Sirius B's existence and properties had appeared in the scientific press and popular astronomy publications by the 1920s, and this information could have been transmitted through various channels to reach the Dogon before Griol's arrival. More fundamentally, anthropologist Walter van Beek led a follow-up study of the Dogon in 1991 that found no evidence for the astronomical knowledge reported by Griol. Van Beek reported that while the Dogon spoke about Sigutolo, which Griol had claimed referred to Sirius, different informants disagreed completely about which star was meant. All agreed, however, that they learned about the star from Griol. This suggests that Griol himself, who had studied astronomy in Paris before becoming an anthropologist, may have inadvertently transmitted astronomical concepts to his informants, or interpreted their responses through the lens of his own knowledge. Additionally, the claimed Dogon knowledge, when examined closely, does not align as precisely with astronomical fact as proponents suggest. The Sigi ceremony's 60-year cycle conflicts with Sirius B's 50-year orbital period. Claims about Sirius B's rotational characteristics and historical visibility remain unverified and inconsistent with astrophysical understanding. The Dogon apparently knew nothing about Uranus, Neptune or Pluto, knowledge that any civilization capable of interstellar travel would presumably have possessed and shared. The selective nature of the supposed knowledge, combined with the methodological problems in its documentation, suggests cultural contamination rather than ancient extraterrestrial contact. Puma Punku, part of the Tiwanaku archaeological complex near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, represents another site frequently cited as evidence for advanced ancient technology. The site contains precisely cut stone blocks of andesite and red sandstone, some featuring interlocking H-shaped designs with apparently machine-like precision. The blocks fit together without mortar, with joints so tight that modern observers have claimed not even a razor blade can be inserted between them. Some blocks weigh over 100 metric tons. How did the Tiwanaku civilization, which flourished in the region from approximately 500 to 1000 CE, achieve such precision with the stone tools available to them? Mainstream archaeological interpretation attributes the stonework to the skilled craftspeople of the Tiwanaku civilization, one of the most significant pre-Columbian cultures of the South American highlands. The Tiwanaku developed a sophisticated society supporting up to 400,000 people at its peak, with extensive agricultural systems, trade networks extending hundreds of kilometers, and the organizational capacity for monumental construction. The precision of the Puma Punku stonework, while impressive, has been demonstrated through experimental archaeology to be achievable with stone tools and substantial time investment. Researcher Stella Nair of UCLA experimented with replicating Puma Punku-style carvings using stone tools including flint, agate, jasper, and obsidian blades, flakes, and chisels. She successfully carved a half-cross-shaped design approximately 8 inches across, achieving precision comparable to the ancient examples. The process took 40 hours, though she estimated an experienced craftsperson could complete similar work in approximately 25 hours. The flat interior surfaces that characterize many Puma Punku carvings proved more challenging to replicate, though not impossible. Additional research has suggested alternative explanations for some of the site's most puzzling features. Scientists from France and Peru, including geopolymer researcher Joseph Davidovitz, have proposed that some Puma Punku blocks may have been cast rather than carved, using a form of ancient geopolymer concrete. Electron microscope analysis of samples from the site revealed compositions and microstructures that could indicate artificial manufacture rather than natural stone. The red sandstone blocks in particular contain sodium carbonate not found in local geology, suggesting either long-distance transport or, alternatively, on-site manufacture using a cementite mixture. If some blocks were indeed cast, this would explain both their precision and their uniformity, since casting produces identical shapes far more easily than carving. This geopolymer hypothesis remains controversial and requires further verification. Yet it illustrates an important principle. The existence of unexplained features does not establish the existence of extraterrestrial intervention. Alternative explanations, including overlooked technologies and manufacturing techniques within the range of human capability, deserve serious consideration before invoking explanations that require abandoning everything we understand about physics, astronomy, and the history of technology. The site was apparently abandoned before construction was completed, likely due to the sudden collapse of the Tiwanaku civilization around 1000 CE. Environmental evidence suggests that prolonged drought devastated the agricultural base that supported the population, leading to social disintegration and the dispersal of communities into surrounding highland regions. The unfinished state of Puma Punku, with blocks scattered as if abandoned mid-construction, reflects this historical catastrophe rather than any mysterious disappearance or extraterrestrial departure. Dr. Alexey Vranich of the University of California, Berkeley, undertook detailed archaeological documentation of the scattered stone blocks and used 3D printing to create miniature replicas that could be physically manipulated to reconstruct possible original configurations. This methodology revealed that the site likely contained buildings with multiple aligned doorways creating mirror effects, and that the interlocking H-blocks functioned as components of a modular construction system. The research demonstrated sophisticated architectural planning and engineering, achievements attributable to human intelligence and craftsmanship without recourse to extraterrestrial assistance. The broader question underlying all these cases concerns the nature and limitations of human capability throughout history. Ancient astronaut proponents typically begin from the assumption that prehistoric peoples lacked the intelligence, organization, or technology to achieve their documented accomplishments. This assumption, when examined against the archaeological record, appears fundamentally mistaken. Human beings have demonstrated remarkable creativity, problem-solving ability, and technical skill across all documented periods of history. The monuments that survive from antiquity represent not mysteries requiring extraterrestrial explanation, but testimonies to human ingenuity applied to tasks that matter deeply to the cultures that undertook them. Consider the phenomenon of cargo cults, which emerged in Melanesia during and after World War II. Indigenous populations who had previously known nothing of industrial technology witnessed military aircraft delivering supplies, and some developed religious movements centered on ritual imitation of what they had observed, believing that proper ceremonies would cause the gods who delivered cargo to return. These movements arose within living memory, yet within decades, participants who knew the historical origins began incorporating supernatural interpretations. If such transformation can occur within a single generation, the potential for similar processes over millennia becomes evident. The gods who descended from the sky in ancient mythologies may represent not visiting extraterrestrials but human visitors from more technologically advanced cultures, remembered and transformed through centuries of oral transmission. This hypothesis, sometimes called the ancient human civilization hypothesis, proposes that prehistoric societies may have achieved higher levels of development than conventional chronologies acknowledge, and that contact between advanced and less developed populations generated the mythological traditions that ancient astronaut theorists interpret as evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. The hypothesis accounts for the same evidence while remaining within the bounds of known physical possibility. It does not require faster-than-light travel, interstellar civilizations, or any departure from established science. The Fermi paradox provides relevant context for evaluating ancient astronaut claims. First articulated by physicist Enrico Fermi in an informal conversation at Los Alamos in 1950, the paradox emerges from the apparent contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial civilizations existing somewhere in the vast universe and the complete absence of evidence for their existence. With hundreds of billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone, many hosting potentially habitable planets, and with the galaxy being roughly 10 billion years old, there has been ample time for intelligent life to evolve, develop technology, and expand throughout the galaxy. Yet despite decades of searching through projects like the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI, no confirmed evidence of extraterrestrial civilizations has been detected. The Great Silence, as researchers sometimes call it, remains unexplained. Various hypotheses have been proposed to resolve the paradox. Perhaps intelligent life is extremely rare, requiring an improbable combination of conditions that Earth happened to satisfy. Perhaps technological civilizations inevitably destroy themselves through war, environmental collapse, or other catastrophes before they can expand into space. Perhaps interstellar travel is far more difficult or expensive than currently assumed, making colonization impractical regardless of technological sophistication. Perhaps advanced civilizations choose not to contact less developed worlds, observing them from a distance without interference. Perhaps the galaxy is urbanized, but Earth occupies an inconvenient backwater that nobody has bothered to visit. Ancient astronaut proponents effectively propose that the Fermi paradox has been resolved, that extraterrestrials have indeed visited Earth, leaving their traces in mythology and monuments. Yet this solution raises additional questions. If alien visitors possess the technology for interstellar travel, why would they leave only ambiguous evidence that could be interpreted as indigenous human achievement? Why would they teach humans to carve stones but not leave behind even a single indisputably alien artifact, a piece of technology that could not possibly have been manufactured by any human civilization? Why would their legacy require the interpretive apparatus of von Däniken and his successors rather than being obvious to any observer? The search for extraterrestrial intelligence has operated since 1960, employing increasingly sophisticated instruments to scan the heavens for artificial signals. The project has examined millions of star systems across a wide range of radio frequencies without detecting confirmed evidence of extraterrestrial communication. Astronomer Jill Tarter and her colleagues have noted that when considering the vast parameter space of possible signals, frequencies, and stellar targets, the searches conducted to date represent the equivalent of dipping a glass into the ocean to determine whether fish exist. The absence of positive results does not prove that extraterrestrial intelligence does not exist, only that it has not been detected within the limited scope of human searches. This epistemic humility should apply equally to ancient astronaut claims. The absence of proof is not proof of absence, but neither is speculation equivalent to evidence. The fact that we cannot definitively explain every aspect of ancient monuments does not establish that those aspects require extraterrestrial explanation. Archaeological understanding continues to advance, with new discoveries, analytical techniques, and interpretive frameworks regularly expanding knowledge of the ancient past. Features that seemed inexplicable a century ago often have well-documented explanations today, and features that remain puzzling today may yield their secrets to future research. The ancient astronaut hypothesis, despite its popularity, has produced no peer-reviewed research supporting its core claims. No archaeological expedition has recovered indisputable evidence of extraterrestrial technology. No astronomical observation has detected the homeworld or spacecraft of the alleged visitors. No genetic analysis has identified extraterrestrial sequences in the human genome. The hypothesis exists not as a scientific theory, subject to testing and potential falsification, but as a belief system sustained by its adherents' desire to believe in a universe populated by advanced beings who have taken interest in humanity. This desire is understandable and perhaps even admirable, reflecting a hope that we are not alone in the cosmos, and that contact with advanced civilizations might accelerate human development or provide solutions to the challenges we face. But desire is not evidence, and the most heartfelt wish cannot transform speculation into fact. What the archaeological record does reveal is something arguably more remarkable than extraterrestrial visitation: the extraordinary capacity of human beings, working with the materials and knowledge available to them, to create monuments that continue to inspire wonder thousands of years after their construction. The Great Pyramid demonstrates not alien technology, but Egyptian organizational genius, the capacity to mobilize tens of thousands of workers over decades in service of a cultural vision. Göbekli Tepe reveals not extraterrestrial guidance, but the emergence of complex social organization and symbolic thought at the very dawn of the Neolithic period. The Moai of Easter Island stand as testimony to Polynesian ingenuity, to the refinement of engineering principles through generations of practice, and to the pride of a people determined to honour their ancestors in stone. These achievements require no diminishment through attribution to outside sources. They belong to humanity. The texts preserved on clay tablets in museum collections around the world record the myths and beliefs of ancient Mesopotamian civilizations, their attempts to understand the universe and their place within it. The Sumerian King List, with its impossibly long reign lengths, represents not historical fact but political propaganda, legitimization mythology, and perhaps distorted memory of periods when dynasties rather than individuals held power. The gods who descended from heaven in Sumerian, Egyptian, Greek, and countless other traditions represent not visiting extraterrestrials, but the human imagination projecting human characteristics onto natural and supernatural forces, creating personified deities to explain the inexplicable and provide frameworks for social organization. None of this proves that Earth has never been visited by extraterrestrial beings. Such a negative cannot be definitively established, but the evidence cited by the ancient astronaut proponents, when examined carefully and honestly, does not support their conclusions. The monuments they present as mysterious were built by human hands using human technology. The texts they interpret as describing alien contact are better understood as mythology, literature, and religious expression. The artifacts they present as anachronistic or impossible typically prove, upon investigation, to be neither. The hypothesis survives not because it explains the evidence better than conventional archaeology, but because it tells a more exciting story, one that flatters human importance by suggesting that cosmic powers have taken special interest in our species. The study of the ancient past continues, conducted by archaeologists, historians, linguists, and scientists who apply rigorous methodology to the fragmentary evidence that survives. New discoveries regularly challenge and refine understanding, requiring revision of established narratives. Göbekli Tepe genuinely transformed scholarly views of the Neolithic period. Future discoveries may prove equally revolutionary. The appropriate response to mysteries is not to invoke extraterrestrial explanations, but to continue investigating, to develop and test hypotheses against evidence, to acknowledge uncertainty while pursuing greater understanding. The ancient astronaut hypothesis represents a modern mythology, a story that addresses contemporary anxieties and aspirations through the lens of archaeological speculation. It speaks to alienation from traditional religious narratives by offering an alternative origin story. It addresses feelings of technological inadequacy by suggesting that advanced technology exists somewhere, even if not here. It responds to existential loneliness by populating the universe with intelligent beings who care about humanity. These psychological and cultural functions explain the hypothesis's enduring popularity despite its lack of scientific support. The well-blundelled prism continues to rest in its case at the Ashmolean Museum, its cuneiform inscriptions preserving the Sumerian King List for any visitor who wishes to examine it. The text records kingship descending from heaven, 8 antediluvian rulers governing for hundreds of thousands of years, a flood sweeping over the earth, and subsequent dynasties gradually approaching historical documentation. The document preserves not evidence of extraterrestrial contact, but the Sumerian understanding of their own past, blending mythology with political legitimization in ways that modern scholars continue to untangle. The question of whether intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe remains open, a proper subject for scientific investigation through projects like SETI, the search for biosignatures in exoplanet atmospheres, and the exploration of potentially habitable worlds within our own solar system. The question of whether such life has visited Earth in the past, however, requires evidence that has not been forthcoming. Until such evidence appears, the ancient astronaut hypothesis must be classified with other unfounded speculation, interesting as cultural phenomenon, but unsupported as historical or scientific claim. The monuments of the ancient world stand as testimony to human achievement, to the capacity of our species to organize labor, develop technology, and create lasting expressions of cultural values. These achievements require no diminishment through attribution to outside forces. They belong to the human heritage, evidence that our ancestors, despite lacking modern tools and scientific understanding, possessed intelligence, creativity, and determination equal to any challenge they chose to undertake. The pyramids were built by Egyptians, the Moai were moved by Rapa Nui, Göbekli Tepe was constructed by Neolithic hunter-gatherers. These facts, established through decades of archaeological research, are more remarkable than any speculation about ancient astronauts. The universe may indeed contain civilizations far more advanced than our own, beings who have solved problems we cannot yet imagine and developed technologies that would appear magical by current standards. Such civilizations may exist around distant stars, separated from us by light years of empty space, or they may exist nowhere at all, leaving Earth as the sole home of intelligence in an otherwise sterile cosmos. Either possibility carries profound implications for humanity's future and self-understanding. What the evidence does not support is the specific claim that such beings visited Earth in antiquity, guided human development, and left their traces in monuments and myths. This claim fails not because it is impossible in principle, but because the evidence cited in its support proves, upon examination, to explain nothing that human capability cannot explain. The ancient astronaut hypothesis flourishes in popular culture because it satisfies psychological and cultural needs, not because it accurately describes the past. The archaeological record preserves evidence of human societies developing agriculture, cities, writing systems, monumental architecture, and all the other hallmarks of civilization through their own efforts, learning from experience, accumulating knowledge across generations, and occasionally achieving results that continue to inspire wonder. This is the actual story of human origins, a story more nuanced, better documented, and ultimately more inspiring than any tale of ancient astronauts. The clay tablets rest in their museum cases. The monuments stand in their landscapes. The evidence awaits any who wish to examine it with open eyes and critical minds. The past conceals many secrets that patient research may yet reveal. But the secret of the ancient astronauts appears to be that there were none, that the extraordinary achievements of ancient civilizations emerged from the extraordinary capabilities of the human beings who created them, working with the materials and knowledge their cultures provided. This conclusion does not diminish the fascination of ancient mysteries or the importance of continuing archaeological research. It does not rule out the possibility that future discoveries might overturn current understanding. It simply acknowledges the current state of evidence, which points consistently toward human authorship of the monuments and texts that ancient astronaut proponents attribute to extraterrestrial influence. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence continues through proper scientific channels, scanning the heavens for signals that might indicate we are not alone. Perhaps someday those searches will succeed, and humanity will face the profound challenge of contact with another intelligent species. When and if that day comes, it will represent a genuine revolution in human self-understanding, a moment when speculation becomes fact and the universe reveals its true character. Until then, the ancient astronaut hypothesis remains what it has always been, an imaginative interpretation of ambiguous evidence, a modern mythology addressing contemporary needs, but not a supported account of the human past. The ancient world left abundant evidence of its achievements, evidence that archaeologists continue to study, interpret, and sometimes revise their understanding of. This evidence reveals civilizations of remarkable sophistication, capable of organizing massive construction projects, developing sophisticated astronomical knowledge, creating artistic and literary works of enduring value, and building societies that supported populations numbered in the millions. These achievements emerge from human intelligence applied to human problems using human resources, not from extraterrestrial intervention. The question requires deeper examination of specific claims and the evidence marshalled in their support. Consider the assertion that ancient texts describe advanced technology in terms that suggest extraterrestrial origin. The Hindu epic Mahabharata contains descriptions of aerial vehicles called vimanas, flying craft of various sizes that transported heroes and gods across vast distances. The Vaimanika Shastra, a text purportedly describing ancient Indian aviation technology, has been cited by ancient astronaut proponents as evidence that prehistoric civilizations possessed flight capability. Scholarly analysis reveals a more mundane origin for these texts. The Vaimanika Shastra was not actually an ancient document, but a work dictated in the early 20th century by Pandit Subbaraya Shastri, who claimed to have received it through channeling or psychic revelation. The text describes aircraft designs that, when analysed by aeronautical engineers at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, proved aerodynamically incapable of flight. The Vimanas described in genuinely ancient texts like the Mahabharata and Ramayana to represent mythological devices, chariots of the gods that function within the context of religious narrative rather than technical documentation. Similar analysis applies to the often cited Ezekiel's wheel from the Hebrew Bible. The prophet Ezekiel, writing in the 6th century BCE during the Babylonian captivity, described a vision of divine beings accompanied by wheels within wheels, full of eyes moving in all directions. Ancient astronaut proponents have interpreted this vision as a description of spacecraft, with the wheels representing some form of propulsion system. Yet Ezekiel explicitly identifies his vision as a religious experience, a theophany revealing the divine presence. The imagery draws on ancient Near Eastern iconography, particularly Babylonian and Assyrian representations of divine and royal power, filtered through the prophet's monotheistic worldview. The vision makes perfect sense as religious literature without requiring any technological interpretation. The Dendera reliefs from Egypt provide another example of claimed ancient technology. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera contains reliefs that ancient astronaut proponents have interpreted as depicting electric light bulbs, with a pillar representing an insulator, a snake representing a filament, and the bulb shape representing a glass enclosure. This interpretation appears compelling in photographs but collapses upon examination of the reliefs in their proper context. The reliefs appear in the temple's crypts, accompanied by hieroglyphic texts that explain their meaning. They depict the lotus flower giving birth to a serpent, representing the Egyptian creation mythology in which the world emerged from primordial waters symbolized by the lotus. The serpent represents Harsomptus, a manifestation of Horus, emerging from the lotus. The pillar supporting the serpent represents the Djed, a symbol of stability and resurrection associated with Osiris. The entire scene illustrates religious concepts well documented in Egyptian art and text, requiring no technological interpretation. The supposed light bulb emerges only when the image is divorced from its textual and artistic context and viewed through modern technological assumptions. The Abydos hieroglyphs present a similar case. A relief at the Temple of Seti I at Abydos appears, in certain photographs, to depict a helicopter, submarine, and airplane. This interpretation went viral on the early internet and continues to circulate in ancient astronaut media. Yet the apparent modern vehicles result from a well-documented phenomenon called palimpsest, in which later pharaohs carved new inscriptions over older ones without completely erasing the underlying text. The relevant relief was originally carved during the reign of Seti I and later modified during the reign of his successor Ramesses II. The overlapping hieroglyphs, eroded by time and viewed under particular lighting conditions, create accidental shapes that modern eyes interpret as familiar objects. Complete photographs of the relief, along with documentation of the overlapping cartouches, demonstrate that the supposed vehicles are optical illusions resulting from superimposed text. The original inscriptions read as standard royal titulary, not as descriptions of advanced technology. These examples illustrate a methodological problem pervading ancient astronaut analysis. Proponents typically examine isolated images or text fragments, divorced from their broader context, and interpret them through modern technological assumptions. When the same evidence is examined in context, with attention to the language, artistic conventions, and religious beliefs of the cultures that produced it, the supposed mysteries dissolve into comprehensible expressions of ancient worldviews. The crystal skulls provide another instructive case study. These carved quartz objects, purportedly of pre-Columbian Mesoamerican origin, have been attributed with mysterious powers and extraterrestrial connections. The most famous example, the Mitchell-Hedges skull, was allegedly discovered by Anna Mitchell-Hedges during her adoptive father's archaeological expedition to Lubentun in Belize in 1924. The skull has been claimed to emit light, produce visions, and contain ancient knowledge accessible to those who gaze into it. Scientific analysis has demonstrated that the crystal skulls are modern forgeries. Examination under electron microscopy reveals tool marks consistent with lapidary wheels, a technology not available to pre-Columbian Mesoamericans, but standard in 19th and 20th century gem cutting. Several skulls trace their provenance to a single source, the antiquities dealer Eugène Bobin, who operated in Mexico City in the late 19th century. No crystal skull has ever been excavated under controlled archaeological conditions from a pre-Columbian context. The skulls represent not ancient technology or extraterrestrial influence, but the thriving market in fake antiquities that has existed since Europeans first developed interest in pre-Columbian cultures. The dropper stones of China represent an even more problematic category of evidence, claims that cannot be verified because the alleged artifacts have never been produced for scientific examination. According to the story, An archaeological expedition in 1938 discovered a series of caves in the Bayan Kara Ula Mountains near the Tibet-China border containing graves of small-statured beings and hundreds of stone discs inscribed with microscopic hieroglyphics. The discs allegedly describe the crash landing of an alien spacecraft 12,000 years ago and the subsequent survival of the extraterrestrial Draper among local human populations. No museum has ever displayed a dropper stone. No scientific institution has ever analysed one. No photographs of the alleged discs have been verified. The original expedition members and subsequent researchers named in various accounts of the discovery cannot be traced to actual historical persons. The entire story appears to have emerged from a 1962 magazine article and subsequently elaborated through repetition without any foundation in actual archaeological discovery. The dropper stones exemplify how ancient astronaut mythology can be constructed entirely from fabrication, with non-existent evidence cited as proof of non-existent events. The Ica stones of Peru present a similar pattern of claimed evidence that dissolves under investigation. These carved stones, depicting dinosaurs alongside humans, surgical operations, and other apparently anachronistic scenes, were collected by physician Javier Cabrera beginning in the 1960s. Cabrera accumulated tens of thousands of the stones and opened a museum to display them, arguing that they represented records of an advanced prehistoric civilization. Investigation revealed that the stones were being manufactured by local artisans who sold them to collectors. Farmers and craftspeople in the Ica region acknowledged carving the stones and demonstrated their techniques for investigators. The patina suggesting great age was artificially produced by burying the stones in manure or treating them with fire. The depictions of dinosaurs and advanced technology reflected images from popular culture rather than prehistoric knowledge. The Ica stones represent not ancient records but modern folk art exploiting tourist and collector interest in mysterious artifacts. These cases illustrate a broader pattern in ancient astronaut evidence. When claims can be tested against verifiable evidence, they consistently fail. The artifacts prove to be modern fakes, the texts prove to be religious literature rather than technological documentation, the astronomical alignments prove to be within the range of ancient observational capability. The construction techniques prove to be achievable with documented ancient technology. The hypothesis survives not because its evidence withstands scrutiny, but because new claims continually emerge to replace those that have been debunked. The psychological and sociological factors driving ancient astronaut belief deserve consideration alongside the evaluation of evidence. Research in cognitive psychology has identified several biases that make humans particularly susceptible to such beliefs. Pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli, explains why people see faces on Mars and vehicles in weathered hieroglyphs. Confirmation bias leads believers to notice evidence supporting their beliefs, while ignoring or rationalizing contrary evidence. The proportionality bias suggests that significant effects must have significant causes, making mundane explanations for impressive monuments feel inadequate. The appeal to mystery satisfies a desire for wonder that dry archaeological explanation may fail to provide. Cultural factors also contribute to the hypothesis's persistence. The ancient astronaut narrative offers an alternative to both religious creation accounts and secular scientific explanations, appealing to those dissatisfied with both. It provides a sense of cosmic significance, positioning humanity as the object of extraterrestrial interest, rather than an isolated accident of evolution. It offers hope for technological solutions to contemporary problems, suggesting that advanced knowledge exists somewhere even if not currently accessible. These psychological and cultural functions ensure that the hypothesis will continue to attract adherents regardless of its evidential status. The role of mass media in propagating ancient astronaut beliefs cannot be overstated. The History Channel's series Ancient Aliens, which premiered in 2009 and continues production into its 19th season, has introduced millions of viewers to ancient astronaut concepts packaged as documentary content. The show employs a technique researchers have termed fire hosing, rapidly presenting claims, images, and supposed experts in ways that overwhelm critical evaluation. Viewers encounter a constant stream of alleged anomalies, each presented with dramatic music and suggestive questions, leaving little time for reflection on individual claims before the next arrives. The visual rhetoric of such programming deserves particular attention. Ancient monuments are filmed from dramatic angles, emphasizing their scale and mystery. Computer-generated imagery reconstructs supposed alien spacecraft and contact scenarios with cinematic polish. Talking heads identified as ancient astronaut theorists speak with apparent authority, their claims rarely challenged or contextualized. The aesthetic mimics legitimate documentary production while abandoning the standards of journalistic balance and factual accuracy that documentary conventions imply. Viewers unfamiliar with the distinction between entertainment and education may absorb these claims as established fact rather than speculative entertainment. The internet has amplified these effects enormously. YouTube channels, social media pages, and dedicated websites generate continuous content exploring ancient astronaut themes, creating an ecosystem where believers can find constant reinforcement for their views while rarely encountering substantive criticism. Algorithmic recommendation systems direct viewers who engage with ancient astronaut content toward more of the same, creating filter bubbles that can transform casual interest into committed belief. The democratization of content creation means that anyone can produce ancient astronaut videos, regardless of their qualifications or commitment to accuracy, and reach audiences of millions. The colonialist and racist implications of ancient astronaut theories have attracted increasing scholarly attention in recent years. When von Däniken and his successors express amazement that ancient peoples could have constructed impressive monuments, they implicitly question the capabilities of non-European civilizations. The pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Mesoamerica, the megalithic structures of South America, the Moai of Easter Island, all monuments located outside Europe, receive the ancient astronaut treatment, while comparable achievements of European antiquity, the Parthenon, Roman aqueducts, Gothic cathedrals, rarely attract similar speculation about extraterrestrial assistance. This pattern reflects and reinforces colonial-era assumptions about the relative capabilities of different human populations. 19th-century European explorers encountering the ruins of great civilizations in Africa, Asia, and the Americas frequently attributed their construction to lost white races, biblical figures, or other sources that preserved European supremacy in the face of inconvenient evidence. Ancient astronaut theories represent a modern iteration of this dismissive impulse, substituting extraterrestrials for lost white ancestors while maintaining the core assumption that non-European peoples could not have achieved greatness independently. The damage extends beyond theoretical racism to the concrete erasure of indigenous knowledge and achievement. When ancient astronaut proponents attribute the Nazca lines to alien construction, they dismiss the Nazca people's documented capabilities in textile production, ceramics, and geometric design, capabilities that made the geoglyphs entirely achievable. When they attribute the Moai to extraterrestrial assistance, they ignore centuries of Rapa Nui oral tradition, describing exactly how the statues were moved. When they question whether ancient Egyptians could have built the pyramids, they render invisible the administrative records, worker villages, and engineering papyri that document the construction process in remarkable detail. Indigenous scholars and communities have increasingly objected to these characterizations. The Moai belong to the Rapa Nui people, created by their ancestors using methods their traditions preserved. The pyramids belong to Egyptian heritage, monuments to the organizational capacity and engineering knowledge of ancient Egyptian civilization. The Nazca lines belong to the cultural legacy of pre-Columbian Peru, expressions of religious and ceremonial practice grounded in local ecology and cosmology. Ancient astronaut theories, however entertaining they may seem, participate in a long tradition of denying indigenous peoples credit for their own achievements, a tradition with deep roots in colonial exploitation and ongoing relevance to contemporary struggles over cultural heritage and representation. The phenomenon also intersects with broader patterns of science denial and conspiracy thinking. Ancient astronaut believers often describe mainstream archaeology as engaged in active suppression of evidence for extraterrestrial contact controlled by shadowy forces protecting established paradigms from revolutionary truths. This narrative structure parallels conspiracy theories in other domains, from anti-vaccination movements to climate change denial to flat Earth beliefs. The true believers possess special knowledge that official authorities refuse to acknowledge, whether from malice, incompetence, or hidden agendas. Research into conspiracy belief suggests that it often serves psychological needs for a sense of control and comprehension in a complex world. If powerful forces are actively suppressing truth, then the believer's inability to change prevailing views reflects not the weakness of their evidence, but the strength of the opposition. Every rebuttal confirms the conspiracy rather than challenging the belief. This epistemic closure makes ancient astronaut beliefs remarkably resistant to counterargument, regardless of how thoroughly specific claims are debunked. The Ancient Astronaut Debunked documentary and website by the Chris White represents one of the most thorough systematic refutations of ancient astronaut claims, working through von Däniken's arguments point by point with documentary evidence and expert analysis. Academic Egyptologists, Mesoamerican archaeologists, and specialists in other relevant fields have published extensive critiques demonstrating the errors, misrepresentations, and fabrications pervading ancient astronaut literature. These efforts reach some audiences but face inherent disadvantages in competition with slickly produced entertainment content that requires no critical engagement from viewers. The relationship between ancient astronaut beliefs and mainstream religion presents interesting complexities. Some proponents explicitly position their views as alternatives to religious accounts, arguing that gods were actually aliens and supernatural events were actually technological interventions. Others integrate extraterrestrial visitation into religious frameworks, suggesting that gods used aliens as agents or that aliens transmitted genuine divine knowledge. Religious institutions have generally responded to ancient astronaut claims with indifference or gentle dismissal, treating them as misinterpretations of sacred texts rather than serious theological challenges. The question of whether intelligent extraterrestrial life exists represents a legitimate scientific inquiry distinct from the question of whether such life has visited Earth. Astrobiologists investigate the conditions necessary for life, the potential habitability of other worlds, and the signs by which extraterrestrial life might be detected. The Drake equation provides a framework for estimating the number of communicative civilizations in the galaxy, though its variables remain poorly constrained. Current estimates range from essentially zero, if rare Earth considerations make complex life exceptionally improbable, to millions, if life arises readily wherever conditions permit. Recent astronomical discoveries have demonstrated that planetary systems are common, with most stars hosting at least one planet and many systems containing multiple potentially habitable worlds. The Kepler and TESS missions have identified thousands of exoplanets, including numerous Earth-sized worlds in their stars' habitable zones where liquid water might exist. These discoveries increase the probability that life exists elsewhere, while doing nothing to establish that such life has visited Earth. The distances involved remain immense, the challenges of interstellar travel remain formidable, and the evidence for past visitation remains absent. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, known as SETI, has operated for over 6 decades, scanning the skies for artificial signals that would indicate the presence of technological civilizations elsewhere in the galaxy. Project Ozma, initiated by astronomer Frank Drake in 1960 at the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia, represented the first systematic search for extraterrestrial radio signals. Since then, increasingly sophisticated searches have examined millions of stars across multiple frequencies, employing advanced signal processing techniques to distinguish potential artificial signals from natural phenomena and terrestrial interference. Despite these extensive efforts, SETI has detected no confirmed extraterrestrial signal. The so-called WOW signal, detected by the Big Ear radio telescope in 1977, remains the most intriguing candidate, a strong narrowband signal bearing characteristics consistent with extraterrestrial origin. However, the signal was never detected again despite extensive follow-up observations, and its source remains unexplained rather than confirmed as artificial. More recent candidate signals have all been traced to terrestrial sources upon investigation, from satellite interference to microwave ovens in the observatory kitchen. This absence of detection, despite decades of searching, has generated extensive theoretical discussion. The Fermi paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi, who famously asked, "Where is everybody?" during a 1950 lunchtime conversation, encapsulates the apparent contradiction between the high probability that extraterrestrial civilizations should exist and the complete absence of evidence for their presence. Various solutions have been proposed. Perhaps technological civilizations are rare, arising only under exceptional circumstances. Perhaps they are common, but short-lived, destroying themselves through nuclear war, environmental collapse, or artificial intelligence before achieving interstellar capability. Perhaps they exist but choose not to communicate or communicate in ways we cannot detect. Perhaps the galaxy is indeed full of civilizations, but the distances between stars make contact effectively impossible on any reasonable timescale. The Great Filter hypothesis suggests that somewhere along the path from lifeless chemistry to spacefaring civilization lies a barrier that most evolutionary lineages fail to cross. If that filter lies behind us, perhaps in the emergence of life itself, or the transition to multicellular organisms, or the development of intelligence, then we may have already passed the crucial test and could expect to find few civilizations ahead of us. If the filter lies ahead, perhaps in the development of sustainable technology, or the avoidance of existential catastrophe, then our own long-term survival may be in doubt regardless of whether other civilizations exist. The implications for ancient astronaut claims are straightforward. If extraterrestrial civilizations capable of interstellar travel existed and visited Earth in antiquity, we would expect some evidence of their presence beyond ambiguous interpretations of religious texts and impressive but human achievable monuments. We would expect material artifacts demonstrating technologies clearly beyond ancient human capability. We would expect genetic evidence of manipulation in the human genome. We would expect astronomical knowledge in ancient texts that could not have been obtained through observation alone. None of this evidence exists. The silence of SETI and the absence of physical evidence combine to suggest that if extraterrestrial civilizations exist, they have not yet made their presence known to us in antiquity or since. The methodology of scientific investigation requires that extraordinary claims be supported by extraordinary evidence. The claim that extraterrestrial beings have visited Earth, influenced human development, and left traces in monuments and myths qualifies as extraordinary. It requires not only that intelligent life exists elsewhere, a proposition for which there is no confirmed evidence, but that such life developed interstellar travel capability, travelled to Earth, interacted with human civilizations, and departed without leaving unambiguous evidence of their presence. Each link in this chain represents an enormous assumption unsupported by verified evidence. The standard of evidence applied to ancient astronaut claims should match the standard applied to any historical or scientific claim. Assertions require documentation. Artifacts require provenance and analysis. Interpretations require context and comparison. By these standards, the ancient astronaut hypothesis fails comprehensively. Its artifacts prove to be fakes or misidentified objects. Its textual evidence proves to be misinterpreted mythology. Its architectural evidence proves to be achievable through documented human techniques. Its astronomical evidence proves to be within the range of ancient observational capability. The alternative, that ancient civilizations achieve their documented accomplishments through their own intelligence and effort, requires no assumptions beyond what the archaeological record demonstrates. Humans have consistently proven capable of remarkable achievements when motivated by cultural, religious, or political imperatives. The monuments of antiquity represent not mysteries requiring extraterrestrial explanation, but expressions of human capability applied to purposes that matter deeply to the people who undertook them. The persistence of ancient astronaut beliefs, despite their lack of evidential support, illuminates important aspects of human psychology and culture. People want to believe that the universe contains intelligence beyond Earth, that humanity has cosmic significance, that advanced beings have taken interest in our species. These desires are understandable and perhaps admirable. They reflect hope rather than despair, wonder rather than cynicism. But they do not constitute evidence, and the desire for a particular conclusion cannot justify accepting that conclusion without adequate support. The scientific community continues to search for evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence through legitimate methods. Radio telescopes scan the sky for artificial signals. Spectroscopic analysis searches for atmospheric signatures of biological activity on distant worlds. Robotic probes explore Mars and the moons of Saturn and Jupiter for signs of microbial life. These searches proceed methodically, testing hypotheses against observations, adjusting expectations based on results. If evidence for extraterrestrial life emerges, it will come from such systematic investigation, not from reinterpretation of ancient artifacts or texts. The monuments and texts of the ancient world deserve study on their own terms, as products of human cultures attempting to understand their world, honour their gods, commemorate their rulers, and express their values. The Great Pyramid represents the pinnacle of Egyptian funerary architecture, the product of a civilization that devoted enormous resources to ensuring the pharaoh's passage to the afterlife. Göbekli Tepe represents the emergence of monumental construction among Neolithic peoples, evidence that complex social organization and symbolic thought preceded rather than followed the development of agriculture. The Nazca lines represent ritual expression in a desert landscape, geoglyphs created for purposes that may have included water ceremonies, ancestral commemoration, and cosmic orientation. These interpretations, grounded in archaeological evidence and cultural context, reveal civilizations of remarkable sophistication. The ancient Egyptians developed mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering to levels that supported their monumental construction projects. The Neolithic builders of Göbekli Tepe organized labor, developed stoneworking techniques, and created symbolic representations that demonstrate cognitive capabilities equal to our own. The Nazca created their geoglyphs through careful planning and execution using methods that experimental archaeology has successfully replicated. Each achievement represents human capability, not extraterrestrial intervention. The question that opened this investigation, whether aliens have been visiting Earth for millions of years, finds its answer in the archaeological, historical, and scientific evidence accumulated through generations of careful research. The answer is not what ancient astronaut proponents would wish. The monuments were built by humans. The myths were created by humans. The achievements of ancient civilizations, however remarkable they may appear, fall within the range of human capability. The claim of ancient extraterrestrial visitation, despite its persistence in popular culture and its appeal to those seeking cosmic significance, remains unsupported by the evidence. This conclusion does not close the door to future discoveries. Science proceeds through revision and surprise. New evidence might emerge that transforms understanding, but any such evidence would need to meet rigorous standards of verification, not merely fit within existing speculative frameworks. Until such evidence appears, the ancient astronaut hypothesis must be classified as speculation rather than established fact, as modern mythology rather than ancient history. The universe may contain countless civilizations, some perhaps far more advanced than our own. The cosmos may teem with intelligence, with beings who have solved problems we cannot yet imagine. Or Earth may represent the only world where intelligence has emerged, a lonely outpost of awareness in an otherwise sterile universe. Either possibility carries profound implications, but neither changes the conclusion that emerges from careful examination of the evidence presented in support of ancient astronaut claims. The alleged extraterrestrial visitors to ancient Earth remain exactly that: alleged, unverified, unsupported by evidence adequate to sustain the extraordinary claims made on their behalf. The monuments remain silent witnesses to the cultures that created them. The tablets rest in their museum cases, their cuneiform inscriptions preserving texts composed millennia ago. The archaeological record continues to expand as new discoveries add detail to understanding of the ancient past. The story that emerges from this evidence is a human story, a narrative of civilizations rising and falling, of technologies developing and spreading, of people striving to understand their world and leave lasting marks upon it. This story requires no extraterrestrial authors. It belongs entirely to humanity. The ancient astronauts, it seems, were ourselves all along.